about a year in, I was finding myself in 39 hours of client calls every single week. So that's just client calls on the calendar, just absolutely insane. And you're jumping from one meeting to the next meeting. There's a lot of context switching. I had a business partner, but he wasn't client facing. He managed the finances and some of our back end stuff. But man, it was that was like a really tough time. And probably the hardest parts, there's a couple of really hard moments, but I would say early on, the hardest one was getting myself out of sales. So I brought on somebody to help service. My initial idea was there'll be me, I'll be the kind of the guy, and then I'll have these junior people who will help kind of deliver our service. And I had the service very well structured, and it was an absolute disaster. And that was the first big learning. Because I'd managed people before, but this was the first time that I was managing someone who was in charge of an entire department. And it might not sound like it's very different, but those of you who have done it know, like, it is very different. It's one thing to say, hey, your job is just to do this one little thing. It's another thing to say, your job is all of these things. It becomes a lot more challenging. So there's a people management component of that, which wasn't really the hard part. The hard part was the operation of that department. Because when I was operating it, I was just operating it. I kind of knew how to do it. When you bring in a new person, you have to systematize all that. And it was a total disaster.
Interesting. So that was around when did you bring in that person?
Probably a year in, about a year in, maybe a year and 3 months.
So let's kind of fast forward the next 3 years. You found that person, you had to systemize everything, which I assume you eventually were able to figure out. So now that means, cool, I've got a person. So now you had to ramp up the sales side.
What happened was that person was a total disaster. We had customers churning all of a sudden. I was getting some negative feedback. And then the person who I had hired was slowly getting more intense and aggressive. It just wasn't a good working relationship. And there's probably a ton of reasons for that. I will say not everybody is a great fit for a very early, like an early stage company, whether it's a software or a service company. I think that was probably part of it. So I'm somebody who gives a lot of autonomy, where it's like, oh, I hired you to do this thing. I'm trusting you to do this thing. I think that was probably a mistake. I should have been a little bit more hands-on. So anyway, there's a lot of things that take place there. But eventually I let that person go and I went the other direction. So I hired folks with a lot of experience. And that was one of the hacks. I started paying myself about 10 months in, by the way. So I was paying myself a little bit. I had money to pay somebody else. So when I brought on someone who's more experienced, they're making way more than me, right? I'm paying myself enough to not go bankrupt personally. This person is getting like a normal salary. So I hired somebody very experienced, and that changed everything. I will say one of the advice I give people early on is the important hires, you should just bite the bullet and hire the most experienced person, even if it costs you a lot more. That person, so the first person I hired, gosh, we were 3 months in and things were still chaotic. Second person I hired, Fetty, he's still here. 3 weeks in, was dealing with all customers. And then I was completely out of delivery.
It makes a huge difference.
I'm curious from your perspective here, if you see this a lot, where they'll hire somebody junior and try to train them up on specific systems. And they have a lot of challenges with that. But then when they hire somebody really experienced, it's like it fixes overnight.
I remember I had a mentor of mine kind of break this down for me in a really interesting and simple way. The way that he broke it down is he put on an axis, like a whiteboard. Basically, I'll draw it out so people who are watching can see it, but others, you'll have to jump on YouTube in a sense to see this. Otherwise, you won't be able to see it, but I'll try to describe it. So on the kind of top axis here, he had basically your seniority level. And then you had on the bottom axis, you had the x-axis, you had kind of years. And basically what he said is, if I go in a traditional bank, for example, this is what happens, right? I go in this kind of linear format. I start off as an account person, then I move on to a manager, then I move on to a senior manager, then I move on to whatever VP, and then regional, and then CEO, and the C-suite's up here. But all of these, basically every level to get the right experience is usually about 5 years, right? So in a traditional organization, you're basically doing this. So after 30 years or 35 years, now you can kind of be at that C-suite level, right? But it takes about 5 years because, to master something takes about 10,000 hours. However, what happens in a fast growing organization is that you're moving like this. So you start off your business and now you're basically expecting, hey, you're the account manager. I want you to move to like a team manager, but I don't want to give you 5 years. I want you to collapse that time into like the next 6 months, right? They just don't have the time. They don't have the experience. They can't learn. They're learning on the job and they're going to just mess up the whole time. So your job is to figure out, okay, well, who has this experience, who can basically do this and hopefully move on to the next stage. And then you're going to realize you're going to churn through like 2 or 3 sets of people as your company keeps growing because they just don't have the experience to go to the next level, right? So experience this a lot. And if you don't hire people, you're going to end up just basically paying for their education in a sense. And it's going to be on your dime. And if you're a bank, it works. But if you're a fast growing organization, we don't have a choice. Like we can't mess up. Like we got to, every little thing counts in this business. So, okay, you found your operations person. Then what?
Yeah. So yeah, I brought him in. All of a sudden, I don't have to spend any time servicing customers. It was awesome. Then I became much more focused on sales and marketing. So creating more content. SEO was a big part of what we were doing. So around this time, it actually started working. It take 12 months. Then finally you start ranking for stuff. So that's sort of working. So I spent most of my time speaking at events and working leads, doing sales calls and stuff, which is fine. I actually like that part. That's an easy part. And it's not like we're so high volume that it takes a lot for me. And that's what I still spend my time on. I still spend my time on having sales calls. I do a couple of them a week and then creating content. And that's it. I would say the next milestone is hitting capacity constraints where it's just, I don't have enough people to service the customers. Like some agencies, they're very lean people wise, their service can be delivered without that many people and it's a lot more scalable. For us, we're pretty hands-on with our customers. So I end up hitting bottlenecks with capacity and you have to bring on more people. I would say, surprisingly, I was not expecting this to be a challenge so much, but compensating people, a lot more difficult and nuanced than originally I was expecting. I come from a sales background. Compensation is base salary, variable compensation on a specific result. Well, when you leave the sales realm, it's less binary of did you close a deal or did you not? Did you book a qualified appointment or did you not? Right? Instead, it becomes like, how do I make sure I'm incentivizing the right thing? So we would have swings where it's like our gross profit would be terrible. And then I'd have to adjust how I'm bonusing people, and then it would fix the problem. And that relationship, and I'd heard people talk about this before, but until you truly experience it, the relationship between compensation and actions is so crazy to me when I come from a sales background where that's all it is, but to see in these other departments where seemingly they don't have nearly as much control of what they're being compensated on. Like a salesperson, did you close a deal or not, right? Gross profit is a little tough, right? So gross profit bonus is what I ended up doing. You'd think it'd be a little bit harder for them to manipulate it, but you put a gross profit incentive there, the people figure it out because they want the money. So anyway, that took me a little while to learn. And that was a big breakthrough that I've had this is recent. This is over the last year.
And even when you have engineers on this software side, it's the same. If you find a way to kind of align everybody around certain KPIs that you're trying to hit or North Star metrics, it's like, then your engineers start questioning, well, should I really build this feature? Like they're going to start pushing back because they're like, normally it's just, yeah, like tell me what feature, give me the specs, and I'm going to go and build it. When you start saying, actually, everybody needs to align around user growth or retention, right? Now we're going to sit there and everybody gets a compensation or a bonus around retention. Now the engineers start having opinions. They're like, I don't think this is going to move the needle on retention. I want my bonus. So can we please do something else? It really changes people's behaviors.